French authorities say that they are mobilizing some 45,000 police officers again in an effort to quell violent protests and rioting. Now, this despite a noticeably quieter night on Sunday with fewer people arrested. The weekend saw clashes across the country and the home of a local mayor rammed with a car. In Paris, the destruction is now estimated at some 20 million euros.
Outside Paris City Hall, city council members hold a peaceful protest against the recent unrest in France. The mayor sees a lack of solidarity in society.
We are here to condemn the violence against property and people without any reservation. Nothing can justify violence.
Across France, citizens gathered in front of town halls for solidarity marches. Among them, the mayor of a Paris suburb whose house had been attacked. His wife and child were injured while fleeing the scene. In the eastern city of Reims, the French Interior Minister inspected the damage. On Sunday night, there were fewer clashes, but so far, more than 3,000 people have been arrested.
The average age of those arrested is 17, but some of them who set fires or attacked politicians were aged 12 or 13. I think we have to ask ourselves about their families and parents' responsibility, because it's not the police or the state's problem to solve when a 12-year-old sets a school on fire.
Almost 300 cities and towns have experienced violent protests. President Macron has invited mayors of affected areas to talks on Tuesday to assess the causes of the riots. A call for an end to the violence came over the weekend from the grandmother of Naël, the 17-year-old who was killed by police.
Well, for more now, we want to go to our correspondent, Sonia Fondekar. She is in Paris covering this story for us. Sonia, the French Interior Minister said that 157 people were arrested overnight. That's far fewer than we've seen in recent days. Can we say that things are finally calming down across France?
Well, there's certainly been a significant drop in the number of violent incidents. And there is certainly hope here now that this is a sign that the tide is turning, that some of the energy that, these protesters have invested in days of violence and looting and vandalism is maybe petering out. But of course, the authorities here are not taking any chances. President Macron has said there will be a massive security presence still on the ground. There will be 45,000 police officers deployed across France again tonight. We've just heard from the Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne, who says they will be in place on Tuesday night as well. And there are places where there are curfews still in place, there are restrictions on public transport. So I think many places are still holding their breath.
We heard today the Interior Minister of France, and I'm quoting here, saying that it is not the police or the state's problem to solve when a 12-year-old sets a school on fire. Does the government, does it have a plan to address the underlying causes of this unrest that we've seen for almost a week now?
Well, I think this comment by the tough-talking Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, I think this touches on a big problem in the banlieues, that's the poor suburbs of France. And that is not the parents, but actually a lack of education. There is a lack of good schools. There are teachers missing in schools. That is a fairly widespread problem in many of these poorer suburbs, which are home to largely second and third generation immigrants of African and North African descent. Now, French officials here are saying that President Macron certainly wants a detailed assessment of the underlying causes. He plans to reach out to mayors in the suburbs tomorrow to kind of heal some of these divisions. But he's going to have a tricky challenge because, these banlieues are really blighted by high unemployment, by poor prospects. And the problem here, of course, is the animosity between young people and the police there. Many people there feel that they are subjected to racial profiling. They just don't trust the police. The police, for their part, have a tricky challenge in containing some of the gang violence in these areas. So I think there is no easy way out, and Macron will really have his work cut out there.
And what does all of this mean for France's image internationally?
Well, I think France's international image has already taken a bit of a beating. With these images of arson and looting and vandalism have really gone around the world. I've been getting calls from friends from different parts of the world asking me if it's safe to come to Paris. President Macron, as we know, cancelled a state visit to Germany. That wasn't the first time. We saw another cancellation by Prince Charles III in April because of violent protests against pension reforms. And the other concern here, of course, is that Paris is hosting the Olympic Games next year. Many of those venues are located in neighborhoods, in sensitive neighborhoods that have been at the heart of some of the worst violence. We've heard from the sports minister today who says, security is being beefed up at those sites. So I think the world is certainly watching with concern here.
TW Sonia Fonlikar with the latest from Paris tonight. Sonia, thank you. Well, for more now, I'm joined by Rokhaya Diallo in Paris. She's a writer, a journalist, and activist, and in the past week, she has found herself explaining to the world in English what is happening inside France and why. Rokhaya, it's good to have you with us tonight. The shooting death of Nahel is being described by some as France's George Floyd moment. Is that an accurate comparison?
I think that the comparison is not really accurate because it sounds like if it was the first time that France was facing an issue of police brutality that was fueled by racism, and it's not the first time. 18 years ago, in Clichy-sous-Bois, which is a city in the suburbs of Paris, two teenagers who were 15 and 17 were chased by the police for no reason, and they died during that chasing because they took refuge in a power station. And after their death, 3 weeks of uprising spread all over the country. So that was not the first time. And if we go back to history over the 4 last decades, you can find every 5 years a wave of uprising following the death of one young person of color in a in a poor neighborhood, in a suburban neighborhood. So saying it's the George Floyd moment actually is erasing the past history of racial violence that really belongs to the French society.
Why do you think then that there have been so many opportunities in the past for this problem to be addressed publicly, for something to be done, positive? And each time, as you're saying, that opportunity has been lost. Why?
I think that the major reason is the fact that we still live in denial. Last week, the UN issued a statement to demand to France to address its profound issue of racism and of institutional discrimination. The response from the French authorities was really quick, and it was a total dismissal. And ever since, what I can hear from the government, from the authorities, from high-profile figures, is that there is no such a problem in France than racism. And that's one of the reasons why nothing is done, because people think that our country is colorblind, and that as a consequence, it has nothing to do with racism.
The country's interior minister today said, and I'm quoting here, that it is not the police or the state's problem to solve when a 12-year-old sets a school on fire. Now, I can imagine many would respond by saying it is the state's responsibility to ensure that this 12-year-old is educated, has a modern school, and has well-paid teachers. Do you hear that reply, that reaction to what the Interior Minister said?
To me, it's a very shocking statement because it really hides the fact that the initial reason for the start of the uprising was the death of a 17-year-old teenager. If it wasn't for the death of Nahel, no one would be in the streets. And it's very easy to say that, but young people in France can be exposed to police brutality at a very young age. 5 years ago, a group of high school students was put down on their knees with their hands behind their head and targeted by guns by the police. There were dozens in the streets, and they were between 12 and 17. There was not any public action to just support them and support them, in front of that trauma.
Well, Rokhaya, let me pick up on this, though, about the behavior of these young people. I mean, the police are saying that the average age of those arrested is 17. They say there have been boys as young as 12 who have been vandalizing. What's the role of parents here? I mean, at the end of the day, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old boy or girl should not be running around in the middle of the streets in the middle of the night. Why are the parents not involved more here?
I don't think that those parents are the only one who face, bad behaviors or, disobeyment from teenagers. It's something that happens in all kind of circles. It happens to be regarding those teenagers to be part of uprisings, but I think it's very easy to blame the parents, especially in neighborhoods where many of the parents work very early in the morning or very late at night. And I find that actually that accusation very interesting because the women who live in those neighborhoods are the ones who take care of the babies of the upper classes. They are the ones who wake up early to take care of children who are not theirs. So when it comes to be nannies, people trust them, and suddenly today they're no longer good parents. I think it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense to say that.
You know, from the left in France, we hear accusations that the French police have been Americanized. And from the right, we hear calls for more law and order as the protests become more and more violent. I mean, are we talking about two extremes here, or do both sides have some validity?
Since 2001, every year there have been a new law that was aiming to give more means to the police. And one of the worst that was voted lately was in 2017, which actually made easier the use of fire guns by the police. And since then, the numbers of people who were shot driving was multiplied by 5. So that's an issue. And ever since there is an uprising, the police officers are given more means, and they can even use military guns to face protests and revolts. So I think that there is a problem with the militarization of the police and the way they handle public order. For example, as a comparison, 13 people were killed by the police while driving in France last year, and in Germany, only 1 person was killed in 10 years. So that's a very different way to handle people in the streets and to handle policing.
Okay, let me ask you before we run out of time. I know that the police deny that there is a racism problem within their ranks. I'm wondering what percentage of police officers belong to an ethnic minority? I mean, what percentage of cops look like the people who have been protesting?
I think that many of them actually look like the people who are in the streets. But, focusing on that really doesn't put the focus on the most important point, because the problem is not individual, it's systemic. So if you're part of a system that enable racism, even if you belong to minority, you can be part of that racism operating against people of color. So I'm not sure if it's the solution. To me, the solution is a real change within the process of policing.
Rokhaya Diallo, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Fascinating and important to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much.